Okay, I'll start.
Okay.
All right. Who would like to talk about our first chapter? If you want to start there.
For some reason, I was like, I just didn't really get into the first chapter. It wasn't like as interesting for me, but as we got farther and farther along, like I started to get more interested and I ended up like loving the book. But the first chapter, for some reason, just like didn't grab like my attention as much.
Yeah.
I feel like it was like a good portrait of what the neighborhood looked like and like what the different members of the group were like. I think because Minnow's an artist, so maybe that was like the author's way of incorporating all those details.
Isn't this when he was assaulted by the white boys on his walk home?
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting too, like that people, like Chinese people would wear the pins that said "I'm Chinese," like to like separate themselves, and like so they weren't jumped like Japanese kids were being. And also like at the very beginning, there's like I had it on like my Kindle, but like the character registry where it has like all the kids' names and like their family number and stuff. I feel like the author just did a really good job of like tying in history and like historically like accurate documents and like those kinds of things to make it more real.
Yeah, I liked that every once in a while there was like a picture of like what it actually like the real like images, and I thought that was a really good like reference, so you could actually see like this is like actually how it looked, and I don't know, it just made it more real to me.
I read the author's note in the back of the book, and she did a lot of research on what internment camps and things were like back then. And I think it was her grandfather, or both of her grandparents were in an internment camp, and that's how they met. So it's really interesting that she's able to actually consult like her family for like first person experiences for the story.
Yeah, I read that too, Aimee, and like also she was like, oh, and like any like she like just said like there were some parts that like I bent to make like the story fictional, but then I read the parts that she made like bent, and it was literally just like timeline things. Like she said, oh, like I said this building was in the camp when actually it wasn't built until like 2 months ago. Like it still was like very like historically accurate, I felt like.
I also I didn't realize the book, all the chapters were like from someone else's perspective each time, so I didn't know that like when I first got into it. So I thought it was cool that we kind of got to understand different perspectives, not just like one person telling the whole entire story.
Yeah, what did you guys think of that, going from character to character?
It was kind of odd at first because I didn't realize that, but then I was like, oh wait, this is actually kind of cool.
Yeah, usually I'm not like the biggest fan because I don't necessarily like it jumping around, but like I get hooked on one and I want to know what's still happening. But I thought this like it really worked for this book, and like how Minnow was the only character that was repeated. I thought that was really interesting too.
I also feel like the author did a really good job about making it like each character distinct in their chapter. Like you can tell their different personalities from how they're like narrating and like the things they notice.
Yeah, I feel like the only time I got like mixed up was with the younger siblings. Like I knew like the three brothers, like Shig, Minnow, and Moss, but like then like the younger sisters, I couldn't remember who their brothers or sisters were, like of the older kids. So I kept like having to go back, but that was it, I feel like.
Yeah, I'm like
a couple. Oh, go ahead, Tristan.
Sorry, I was just to say I'm not like the greatest with names. So I kept having to go back to previous chapters to figure out who somebody was.
Yeah,
I took notes on that because I was like, there's so many. I started like my little Google Doc that I'm reading right now.
Yeah, it was definitely a bit hard to keep track, but I do think that it definitely added a lot to the story. Like Tristan, you were saying that each of the characters had a distinct personality for sure. For sure. Do you guys have a favorite like character or chapter? Because I think the one for me that really got me kind of into it was Bet's chapter, because it kind of stuck out because it was so it made you realize like, oh wait, these are like literally kids. Like they're not like adults or even young adults like going through this, like they're literally children in like middle school, early high school age. And she was just like so caught up in this romance that it kind of made me forget for a while what the story was about. And I don't know, I really liked it.
I really liked Yum Yum's chapter. That was the first chapter that like I was like, oh, I want to keep reading. I just thought it was really interesting, and especially with her. Was that the one with her like writing her dad?
Yeah, and wasn't her mom sick? And
Yeah,
she had to
yeah,
take
yeah.
care of her brother as well as her sick mom, and they just moved into their new little house. Yeah.
Yeah, like I liked how it went through like days. It was like day 4 and like day 12. And I just thought it was interesting to see like the progression and like how it was like they were there for like so long. But it was just that was the first chapter that I really liked.
I really liked Mary's chapter because I feel like she was so like angry. And it was like very palpable. And then you kind of started to see like more, well, you could see the cracks in the internment camps to begin with, but there was when you started to really see like the injustices and how they were treated or mistreated.
I also sorry. When reading Twitchy's chapter, I was kind of like dreading it because like Twitchy and Moss, because I'm not really into like the whole war battlefield active stuff. So I was like, oh, like I don't really want to read this. But then I was getting so nervous for him, and when he died, it broke me. I got pretty emotional. I so sad. Oh my gosh! In the chapter following that, where it was all of them together writing about their experiences, and I think it was when they told, was it Aiko, and she just like broke down, or it was someone that they told, and she just completely broke. And Minnow, he was like, I loved him, and I just
I know. Yeah. I thought that was like interesting that they incorporated that, but they didn't make that like a big part. Like it was just like a little more information about him, but like you didn't really need to know anymore. I don't know. I like that it was just kind of subtle, but it was there.
Yeah, I think Tommy and Mary's like chapters where they're in the it's not Topaz, it's something Lake.
Tool Lake.
Tool Lake, yes.
Yeah.
And like when Stan and Tommy, or is it Stan and their other friend that they made? It was the two boys that
Kiyoshi,
where they're like in the like the actual like prison thing. Where they're being starved and stuff. I just like those were like really impactful chapters. I feel like
I thought that was really powerful. I wish there was almost another one, because they like stood up to the guys, and I wanted to hear more, but then they got released. But I was like, wait, what's happening?
Yeah.
Especially with like Kiyoshi talking about how he freezes because of the abuse he faced, and then he's the first one to step forward to join the leader in being punished, I guess.
Yeah, those are good chapters. And yeah, I got very emotional in Twitchy's chapter. Like they all were like so attached to him too. Like after he died, like everyone was very upset. And yeah.
I really wasn't expecting him to die. I was really hoping no one would, but that was really sad.
I was looking ahead to see how many pages I had left in the chapter, and then I like saw it, and I was like, oh no. I was like, I wish I didn't see that. It made me sad like towards the end of the book when they all started going their separate ways, like to New York and to Chicago, and the whole group just kind of separated. Made me sad.
But I like how they like had that in there where they had everybody, and it wasn't just like one person, it was everyone together. I think that was like almost no, not last chapter.
It was the second to last chapter, I think.
That was one of my favorite chapters, I think, actually.
Yeah.
I liked at the end that Shig did come back, and like Mino talked about, once he came back, then like everything got better, and it was just sweet that he did that.
Yeah.
I wish we knew what happened to Moss in the end, because I feel like at the beginning he was like this pivotal role model, and the last we kind of heard was that he was kind of breaking apart, and had to be moved back from the front line or something, right? That's the last that we heard. And I kind of wish there was a resolution to his experience.
Well, and then I think Minnow says something, because he always compares Moss to like stone, and he says something about when stone breaks, you can't repair it.
Yeah.
I remember that.
And like I really was hoping that we'd like get to wrap up with Moss, especially because like at the beginning it talked about how he left school to come back to be like the man in his family, like to raise his brothers and stuff. So it would have been cool to see like, did he actually get to like go to college again, or like those kinds of things too.
I feel like part of it maybe was intentional that he didn't come back for Shig and Minnow's storyline, because when they moved back to San Francisco, it was 3 years later. So he wasn't 14 anymore, Minnow. He was 17, which is that's a big age difference for growing up. And I think at that point he realized that like he kind of had to step up, especially when it was just him and his mom,
Mhm.
and he kind of had to take on a new role in the family.
Mhm.
I know it was weird. He always, for some reason, just felt really young, like throughout the entire book. And so then at the end, when he was 17, for some reason, it was just like strange to me. It felt like it didn't fit.
Mhm.
I have a question for everyone. If you guys could go through it and read it again, is there anything that you would have wanted to be different reading it? Or did you think it was like good overall? Like, is your overall rating pretty good?
I would rate the book like pretty high. I thought it was really good. And one thing that I would change is I'd pay more attention to like that character registry, because I did not realize that like the characters were changing until like they got to the camp, and I was like, wait, why is like Minnow not going with like his younger brother? Because like I was like, why are they like being separated? And I was like, oh my gosh, because it's a girl. And then I realized that like the characters are changing. But I ended up really liking, and I reread it to understand it better. But I thought it was good.
So a little confusing. I got that too. That was kind of the thing I would change. It was like confusing at first, but then once you kind of get into it, you start to understand a little better.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess the only thing, which we already talked about, was just like knowing what happened to Moss, or like just hearing a little more about like how they're doing, like everyone where they are. Like it said a little bit, but I'd like to know like what, like maybe like a year or two later, like what happened to them.
I was also waiting for, in the book, like them to find out that a bomb was dropped in Japan by America.
Oh, yeah.
I was kind of waiting for that to be like, oh no, something to happen, but it was never mentioned in the book. I don't think that we bombed
Mhm.
their city.
Yeah, that would have been interesting.
Yeah. Especially for like the kids with like proud Japanese parents, like Tommy's family, who are like eager to just get back to Japan. And then like, yeah, that would have been good info to have.
Tommy stayed, right? He didn't go back with his parents. Okay. That's what I thought.
And I also wanted to know about that. Like, how did that
Yeah.
conversation end up happening with his parents? Because obviously they were going to be really upset, and his sister went with him, right?
Mhm.
So, I don't know.
His parents really sucked though. They were so
Yeah, they did.
mean.
That was one of the notes that I took down for a question for us to talk about. What did you guys think like the parents' perspective was in this story? Because obviously they were like, most of them were pretty strict with their kids, or alternatively like very like unengaged or like not involved. What do you guys like think the parents were thinking as this was going on?
I feel like they're probably just trying to like keep a tough face, I guess, because I feel like if you're suddenly moved out of your home with your children, like you don't want your children to know you're scared or upset or angry, because you want to be like that, I don't know, that like steady place for them where they can go to with that and be solid. Although we didn't see that from all of the parents really, but I think some of them were trying their best, and I think some of them could have tried a little bit harder.
I was thinking of that just because there's a couple times in the book where it almost seemed like they were just like living a normal life, going to high school, going to movies, eating popcorn and stuff, and the kids didn't seem too bothered at multiple parts in the story. So I was just like wondering, because this whole time they're in a camp that they can't leave.
Whose dad was it that like took the bat and was participating in like the riots? And
It's Tommy's dad, I think, right?
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Whoever's little sister is it Ayo?
It's Aiko, I think.
Aiko? Okay, yeah.
They call her Ike for short.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
She was the one with the bat, right?
yeah,
Okay, for some reason I was thinking it was Mary, but they just played softball together.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, I thought it was like a pretty impactful moment when he grabbed the bat and she told him, no, like leave my bat here, that's for games, it's not for whatever you're gonna go do. And he still left, but he left the bat then. But it was interesting because throughout nobody had really been commenting on him doing that. Well, I mean, they had that like face off at the truck with the food, but nobody was really standing up to him, and she finally like had enough.
Well, I just thought it was interesting also, like the differences between Topaz and Tool Lake. Like once they said no, they wouldn't fight in the army, but no, they're not gonna like say they're completely loyal to the US either. Like I don't know, like they completely like took almost like all the security away from Topaz, and like the other Tule Lake was under like martial law. Like, I don't know. I just thought that was awful, but it was just very interesting. And especially that would be interesting to know like the parents' perspectives over there, like how it changed once like the no-nos left, and it was just like everything pretty much was lifted.
And then like part of me with the no-nos, I was like, why are they so angry? But then I was like, wait a minute, like they're being ripped away from their home, they're being mistreated like massively and discriminated against, even though they moved here and became American citizens. Like, I think I'd be pretty angry too during like all of that. And it was like a good reminder to me to, I guess, check my privilege a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why maybe the parents were a little more strict and upset and engaged in the actual war than the kids were, was because they were not born in America. All the parents had moved to California or wherever they were living. And it was the children, the ones, you know, who were born in America. So I think, you know, the parents are like, we moved here like with intent to be here, like to be Americans. And then they kind of felt betrayed by that, by, you know, working, having jobs, being like, you know, good citizens, and then being put into these camps without having done anything wrong.
Yeah.
Did you
One thing I
guys?
thought was interesting was like, which we learned at the very end, which it stood out to me, was that Moss was born in Japan and he was brought over when he was 2. So I was wondering if like that would change anything like citizenship wise, or if like, I don't know, that was just something that kind of stood out to me, that he wasn't born in America.
Yeah, I did also notice that.
I really loved Moss's chapter. Like I felt like it was so powerful because he's like loyal, but also questioning that loyalty. And like, I remember he says something like, we have to be twice as perfect to be considered half as good. And that like really stood out to me, because it's true in this time and even now that they're working twice as hard and doing things and they're still not considered equal. And it's just like he's giving up, well, Twitchy gave up his life and Moss is giving up his life for the country, and they're still not getting treated like.
Even reading about Twitchy's friends who died too, that was hard also.
Yeah. I think it was like David, who was really nice, and he ended up dying while saving Twitchy. That one was like so sad.
Yeah. Another like parent perspective that would have been cool to have too is like, I mean, they had to sell like all of their belongings before they left, but then like Yum Yum's family got to keep like that building that they were renting. And like, I was curious too, like how that was done. And like, cause I mean, it was multiple years. And then also like Stan's family, like how they couldn't keep like the space for their store at least. Like, I mean, I guess maybe they just didn't own the building yet, but like that would have been like a cool detail, I feel like, to like know about. Cause I definitely wondered like, oh, how come Yum Yum's family got to at least keep their building and then they had to sell the store completely?
When I was in high school on Vashon Island, we had this woman come and speak to our class. It was like in 7th or 8th grade, and her name was Mary Matsuda. And she was actually a child during the Japanese internment, and her family owned strawberry farms on Vashon Island. So they went to an internment camp, and their neighbors, I think, paid for their farms or something, or kept the farms while they were gone. And then luckily they were able to go back to their farms after. But I remember, you know, being so young, like what was that, like 12, 13, and it being really an impactful story to hear, because I think that was really the only time in all of college that all of my education that I even learned about the Japanese experience during that war, you know.
So
Were you guys taught at all about it?
I was just gonna ask, I never did, like, until I read this book, but it seems like you had some good background knowledge to apply when you started reading it, maybe?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So
I think the extent of my knowledge, you know, like just simply was that Japanese were interned during the World War.
Yeah.
But I don't think I realized how poorly they were treated and like how bad discrimination was back then.
And it's also pretty upsetting that like I haven't ever heard of that, and like I'm 21 years old. Like that's something's wrong there. Like,
you guys ever read those? I think they're like Dear America books, or they're like diaries from the perspectives of children from different points in history. I remember in like 5th grade, I read one, and it was from the perspective of a little girl at a Japanese internment camp. And I think that's like the only time I ever heard about it or learned about it. And that was like reading I did on my own. But I remember something that stood out to me was her talking about the food and how it was really gross. And then she said that the cooks were pairing like peaches with rice for a dessert, and that it like disgusted her because rice is considered like a savory food in their culture. And I remember like that detail is just still sticks in my head, because it's like they really did not try to, I guess, enmesh the people or like meet them where they were.
Unless anyone else has something to say, I kind of want to shift to a different thing here. But at the end of the book, I think it was near the end, I remember them talking about giving like people being racist in apartment complexes. And I was also like connecting that to the times we're in now, and that's still happening. And it's happening pretty strongly, and people aren't even realizing that this is still a thing. Does anyone have any comments on that and like applying it to the real world?
I was going to kind of talk about that too, because like I said, like I didn't realize that this level of discrimination happened back then for Japanese individuals, Japanese Americans. And this was during the time of segregation. So we learned so much about Black people being discriminated against them, while also not knowing that Japanese Americans were being like almost equally as discriminated against during that time. And it's interesting because I don't like I know recently there's been some like events of like Asian discrimination and hate going on in the media. And until I heard about that, I didn't know that Asian Americans were even being like targeted by people. Like I just didn't know.
That's like pretty upsetting, honestly, because it's like they're feeling like they're not included and like we don't care about them, but it's like we don't know and we should know.
Yeah.
So I feel like reading that part really like made me think like, oh, like other people are too. Like,
and it makes me wonder because like children of the people who are interned are still alive today, like children, grandchildren, great grandchildren, and it makes me wonder, like, do they still feel like it's us against them or them against us? You know, do they feel like they're still being discriminated against? Like, I don't know. Like, I am just very curious now.
Still, like
it goes back to what Tristan said about our privilege, and we should know like what we have and what you were saying earlier.
I thought it was interesting. I think it was in Moss's chapter when one of the guys in his like unit or whatever was Black, and they got on a bus and he went to the very back, and Moss didn't like, I think he sat in the white section.
Yeah.
Or he sat right behind it or something, but he was talking about that. But
he was like, I don't know where I belong.
Really
Yeah.
The part in Minnow's like first chapter where he gets jumped reminded me of like the beginning of the pandemic, because there were Asian Americans who were like physically assaulted or jumped just like walking out in public. And I think in New York they started like some group started an organization that paired up like younger people to walk with elderly Asian Americans to make sure they were safe and not being attacked. And I think that might still be going on too, at least walking together.
Yeah, there was a bunch of like Stop Asian Hate protests, and I just didn't even know that was the thing that was happening, and I feel bad. And that again brings up, we have to check our privilege, because that's not something that we've ever had to experience or be fearful of.
Well, that's like in the book when the Chinese people were wearing the buttons saying like I am Chinese, like that made me sad as well, that like people just see Asian and they just think like it's like in this time like, oh, everyone's Japanese, like we hate everybody, like, and there's, I don't know, that just really like that they had to specify that they weren't like Japanese, that's everyone's first instinct. It's like, oh, you're Asian, you must be this, like,
and we
I don't
like
know.
think that they're from there when they were born here, so like we have to stop assuming things. Like, I mean, I'm sure everybody might accidentally like just assume that someone's from somewhere when they're not, so that's something that needs to stop. Like, people can be Asian born here, like it's a normal thing.
I know, like not all Asians are the same. There's so many Asian countries, like they shouldn't be trying to like assume everyone's just from like, just like you're Asian, just clump it together. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me on page 3 when Minnow's describing the like propaganda poster where it's like getting trim for fighting him, and it has like a stereotypical drawing of a Japanese person, and he talks about how he would draw the people in his community, And then he says, if someone is out looking for a Japanese spy and they think a Japanese spy looks like the guy from Sutro's ad, they'll never find him. And I
You guys
thought,
seen Breakfast at Tiffany's
Mhm.
Yeah.
with the Asian neighbor, and it's like played by a white guy, and it's like
Mhm.
so racist, but like
Exactly.
the way that they were describing the propaganda pictures made me think of I don't remember his name, but the guy from Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Yeah.
It
So
looks
didn't
like
they-
we have
wasn't-
like 4 minutes left if somebody wants to think of a good closing question or statement.
Well, one thing that I was kind of hoping or like wishing, I guess this kind of goes back to your question about like what would you change about the book, is I wish there was like another chapter or two at the end that talked more about their reintegration back into their community.
Yeah.
I wish we learned more about that and what it was like for them. Especially like with Minnow going back to school, he said that the school was like fully segregated, which I thought was interesting. He was like white kids, Asian kids, Black kids, Hispanic kids all together in one school, which with the time period, that doesn't sound right to me. I mean, I guess it could be possible. I don't know. But I did wish to learn more about what that could have been like and what their experience was.
Mhm.
With that, for one of my like media reflections for this class, I ended up listening to a podcast called Order 9066, and it was about Japanese internment camps.
Mhm.
And it goes into like there's like episodes about like what it was like returning back home after that, and also like something too was like a lot of times like in the internment camps after taking the questionnaires to see like your loyalty,
Mhm.
like if you filled those out, like you like were able to like move, but like at first they wouldn't let you move back home. They would try and move you more like east, because like they didn't want anyone to be on the West Coast anymore, really. And so that podcast is pretty good if you are interested in kind of learning about people's experiences like once they got back.
Mhm.
Yeah, good recommendation.
Yeah. I remember for one of the video sessions too, it talked about like different like minority experiences, and one of them it was like a lady, it was like a TED Talk episode thing, and she was like she became like a pretty prominent figure in education, but her family had also been like through the internment camps. And like I just remember like it just talked about like all the things that weren't there to help people like come back into their lives that they had before. And like it did take a really long time to get back to where they were before they were literally like taken away from what they
Yeah.
had. So like
It's crazy because essentially there were, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people like are wrongfully incarcerated. And then at the end it said they were given $25 and a bus pass. Like that's crazy. And there's nothing they could do about it. Like there's no route for them to, to ask for more reparations for what they went through. Like they pretty much all have to start from scratch. And like we learned at the last chapter, like they couldn't find housing, like prospects of jobs, no one would serve them. It must have been incredibly hard. And I feel like honestly, like if I was a descendant of a, someone who experienced that, like if I was a grandchild or, I would probably have a lot of resentment still, like because that treatment is just horrible.
Yeah.
I feel like our government tends to throw money at people and hope that it solves the issues that our government directly caused, like with the Japanese leaving the internment camps and like with indigenous populations. They're like, well, we're not going to actually help you with your problems, but here's $25 or whatever. And they don't actually address the systems that are causing like the problems or the oppression. They just kind of let it keep on going.
And all this time,
oh, go ahead. No, you can go.
I was just gonna say all this time I thought FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt were like good. I thought they were like one of the better like presidential, people. The president and his wife. And so I was like pretty disappointed. I was like, wow, like that happened during that presidency. I was very shocked.
Yeah.
No, that's kind of like the stamped finding out like Abraham Lincoln kind of sucked as well. Like
They
I
all
don't know.
suck.
I just
No
feel like a
politician
lot
is
of
good.
yeah, like the history is like clouded the way that they want us to see it. But
Exactly. It's what we're taught, and what they don't want us to know about.
I guess if you're like actively trying to like get into power, are you the best person? Like why, it's like why do people want so much power? Is it for the power? Or is it to actually help people, I guess?
Truly, yeah.
Well, we learned like one of the video sessions, they did videos on the Japanese internment, and they said one of the camps was in Puyallup. And I was really surprised that like it was so close to home, but I never got it at all. Like that was pretty shocking to me that they just like kind of neglected to tell us that, and it was like 45 minutes away from my house. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like every time we're
That's
taught
scary.
something like bad in history, it's always like far away from us. Like it didn't happen here or whatever. When it's like, no, it happened right over there.
I just looked up the woman I was talking about, Mary Matsuda, because I was interested if she was actually interned in Puyallup, but she was actually at Tula Lake.
wow,
Isn't that crazy?
that's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious like how many internment camps they had, and if it like was across the United States or if it was only in like certain areas.
Yeah. I definitely would be interested to learn more, for sure. Are we
no.
happy on time?
She left.
Yeah, booted, I think. Um,
She sent a message to the
yeah.
chat. There were a total of 10 Japanese American internment camps holding approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans for varying periods of time in California, Arizona, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Arkansas. Well, I don't know if that's all of them, because if there was one in Puyallup.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like 10 is way too few to hold that many people.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Okay.
Hold on.
Okay, Brittany says she got kicked out. She's trying to come back. So we'll just make a note that says like, oh yeah, Brittany was here. She was trying. Yeah, I really liked this book. I thought it was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And
I feel like it's a little old for elementary school. I feel like it's more high
Yeah.
school, but it was definitely very good.
Mhm. I think it's like thinking back on the books that I read like in middle school and high school that like and capture like certain experiences that people face like during wars or discrimination or etc. Like I think that this is a really good one that highlights what people's experiences actually were like, and not like a stereotypical like narrative that is not based on anyone's true experience.
Yeah.
it
This
definitely
is-
didn't gloss over anything.
Yeah. This is off topic, but I feel like it's really good to know for the book. But I really loved the quote in 27 where Mr. Katsumoto says that he doesn't want that they don't want to give people the wrong idea, and his wife's like, what's that? And he's like, that we're decent people. And she asks like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, decent people don't kick out other decent people, so if we're decent, they can't be decent. And I thought that was like very interesting, because like there had to be a lot of like dehumanizing and like all of that jazz for people to think that it was okay to do that.
Trying to find the last chapter's dates. Okay, so the last chapter goes from February to March of 1944, or no, 1945. So August 1945 is when we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima in Japan. So like I almost wish there was a sequel to like to know what happens then, and like if people had to go back to an internment camp, or what the fallout was like for Japanese Americans living in America.
Yeah, I agree.
And like to be back, you know, in the general public when that event happened could be really scary.
Yeah. Well, and then I wonder if at that point the people who wanted to go back to Japan, I wonder if they were already back there or not. But I mean, there were so many, like I said, it might take a long time. That would be like another insane level to it. Like we send Japanese Americans back to Japan and then bomb Japan.
I mean, like honestly, like I wouldn't doubt that that was the intent.
Yeah, that could be.
Yeah.
Especially if they're like no-nos. as
Yeah.
well.
They're seen as traitors. Who cares?
Then I'm also like, I'm curious how they were seen, like if they did go back to Japan, like back in Japan, considering they had just come from and been living in America for so long. I'm curious if that was a hard transition as well.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the parents were conflicted, because a lot of them had moved to America when they were so young, you know, that Japan like wasn't really a home anymore, or like maybe they didn't have like an established home there or family there. So like to go back to Japan where they have nothing, or to stay in America where they also have nothing, you know? It's really conflicting.
Well, and then would the Japanese think that they're spies the way that America thought they were spies?
Not to mention, I think some of the kids don't even speak Japanese. So it's like the kids at least are almost more American than they are Japanese. So that really sucks for like them to like connect more with their American identity, and then to be like turned away by America. Are we on time, you think? Brittany's back.
I think we're good on time.
Okay.
Oh, it's not letting me talk. Oh.
Awesome. Well, Demi, were you recording it?
Yes, I got it recorded. So I was just gonna like post it on YouTube. You can like make it private to just, and then like give them the link. So
Okay, perfect.
Sounds good.
I'll let you know when it's uploaded.
Awesome. Thanks to me.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Thank you.
Good conversation.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Conversation, everybody.
Yeah. Bye, friends.
Bye.
Bye.